Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Oh My Stars, What Just Happened, a webinar from Skilled Nursing News and Quality Rehab Management. I'm your moderator today, Editor Alex Spanko. Before we get into today's presentation, I just want to lay down a couple of ground rules for how things are going to go today. We will be sending out both a recording of this presentation as well as all of the slides to you at the conclusion of the broadcast. So if you want to go back, if you want to use this for future reference, you will have access to all of this information. We would also like to encourage you to ask any questions you may have for our presenters today about the 5-star program and the changes that may have been occurring. So please feel free to type it into the interface that you see on your screen. We'll be collecting those throughout the presentation, and toward the end, maybe about 45 minutes past the hour, we'll start to answer those with our panelists. So please feel free to type the questions as they come into your head, and we'll get to them, or we'll get to as many as we can before the conclusion of the hour. So with all that information out of the way, I'd like to introduce Susan Krall, who'll take it away from here. Susan?
Thank you, Alex, and thank you for all of you who have taken time out of your day for this hot topic. We at QRM are committed to supporting the success of our clients. We work hand in hand every day with operators who are really focusing on quality outcomes for their patients. It was quite alarming when as much as 36% of providers recently saw a decline improvements and gains in our 5-star ratings. So with that, Amy, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Alex, for today's presentation. I appreciate it. Go ahead to the next slide, please. Over the next 60 minutes or so, we're going to be reviewing changes to the 3 domains of 5-star. We're going to discuss how payroll-based journaling, or PBJ, staffing hours heavily influence the staffing star, and then finally we're going to detail some strategies to help you improve your 5-star rating. Next slide, please. No matter where I go, I am just hearing lots of people asking me, oh my gosh, what just happened to my stars? And there's various reports out there, and I just wanted to share a bit of the statistics that are out there so far. Approximately 47 or 48% of providers lost 1 or more stars in the quality domain. 36% of providers saw a decline in their overall star rating, and then 33% of providers lost staffing stars, while 23% of providers lost stars under the health inspection domain. And then here's some good news, 16% of providers actually gained at least 1 star. Go ahead to the next slide, please. I just want to give you a brief overview of the 5-star quality rating and how it's determined. The overall quality star rating is based on the results of 3 domains: the health inspection domain, the quality measure domain, and the staffing domain. Each facility is assigned from 1 to 5 stars based on their performance in these domains. The star rating of those 3 areas are then used to determine a facility's overall star rating, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. Next slide. Just a quick little overview of what happened in April. Well, first thing, we expected that the lifting of the health inspection freeze was coming. That wasn't the surprise, but CMS also made changes impacting the 3 domains that make up the quality rating score. Today, we'll be covering some of those changes, which include lifting of the health inspection freeze, changes to the staffing domain, including adjustments to the rating threshold, as well as changes that place greater emphasis on RN staffing, and then changes to the quality measure domain, which includes new and removed quality measures, along with new scoring methods to calculate the QN star. In addition to these changes, 5-star ratings are now suppressed for special focus facilities, which is also new. Next slide, please. So first, we're going to take a look at the health inspection domain and cover the changes there. Next slide. The health inspection domain carries the most weight in the five-star calculation, and as of April 24th, when these changes took effect, we returned to a prior method of calculating the star in this domain, which means that the 3 most recent standard surveys and the last 36 months of any substantiated complaint investigations are used to calculate the health inspection star. The health inspection rating is the foundation for the five-star rating. Staffing is going to be able to pull the overall star in one direction or the other, and the QM score can also pull the overall star rating in one direction or another. More on that in the final calculation later in the presentation. Next slide, please. So as of April, we went back to the rating methodology from February of 2018. So the health inspection rating is influenced by survey deficiencies, and each deficiency is assigned points based on the scope and severity. The higher the scope and severity, the more points assigned. And under the health inspection domain, let's be clear, more points equal a lower star rating. Then, survey revisit points are assigned for second, third, and fourth revisits, which is why it is so very important that when we do get deficiencies that we clear them on the first revisit. For substandard quality of care deficiencies, additional points are added, and if the status is past noncompliance for a deficiency and the severity is actually immediate jeopardy, so that J, K, and L, then the points associated with it are given at a G level citation. Then the top 10% of facilities with the lowest deficiencies are going to receive 5 stars. The middle 70% receive a 2, 3, or 4-star rating, and then the lowest 20% receive a 1-star rating. Next slide, please. Here, you can see the points that are associated with the various scope and severity of deficiencies. The figures in parentheses actually indicate points for deficiencies if there is substandard quality of care. The blue shaded cells denote deficiencies with a scope and severity level that constitute substandard care. You can see by this illustration here that those have much higher points. For example, if you get cited under F600, which is one of those quality of care tags, then, and it's a level H, you are going to receive 40 points. Whereas if you get cited for F880, which isn't that quality of care, citation, then you're going to get 35 points. So you're going to see fewer points. I just also want to point out that deficiencies from life safety surveys and or federal comparative surveys are not used in the 5-star calculation. However, deficiencies from a federal oversight survey are included. Go ahead with the next slide, please. So earlier I mentioned that the health inspection star rating uses 3 most recent standard surveys. The more recent the survey, the more heavily weighted it is. So the most recent survey, or what they refer to as cycle 1, has a weighting factor of 1/2. The next previous period, which is cycle 2, has a weighting factor of 1/3. And then the oldest survey, or cycle 3, has a weighting factor of 1/6. These scores are then summed to create the survey score. And then after that, they include the complaint and revisit points to give you your overall star rating. Now, if for some reason a facility has only 2 surveys, and then those 2 surveys are used to determine the health inspection rating, with the most recent survey accounting for 60% of the weight, while the older survey accounts for 40%. Facilities who have only 1 standard health inspection would not have sufficient enough data to determine a health inspection rating, and their rating is set to missing for the health inspection domain, and then they would not get an overall an overall quality rating assigned to them. No ratings would be reported for staffing or quality measures either, even if that information is available. So next slide, please. So complaint investigations are assigned to a time based on the 12-month period in which the complaint survey occurred. Remember, only substantiated complaint deficiencies impact your 5-star rating. Complaint inspections that occurred within the most recent 12 months from when the data is uploaded receive a weighting factor of 1/2. Those from 13 to 24 months ago have a weighting factor of 1/3, and then those from 25 to 36 months ago have a weighting factor of 1/6. In other words, the more recent the substantiated complaint, the greater impact it's going to have on your overall points. As these complaint deficiencies age, it impacts your health inspection score rating less and less. Now, to avoid the potential for double counting when deficiencies appear on both a standard and a complaint survey, deficiencies on the complaint inspections that occurred within 15 days of your recertification inspection are only counted once. But if the scope and severity differ between the two inspections, then the highest scope and severity combination is used to calculate the points. So when you're calculating the health inspection points from complaint deficiencies from a given period are added to the health inspection score before they calculate revisit points. So remember, I said no points for the first revisit, but if you have a second revisit, it's 50% of your health inspection score, and then the third revisit is 70, and the fourth is 85%. So the longer it takes you to clear, the more points you're adding up. And again, remember, points under the health inspection domain are not good. Those equal lower stars. Go ahead with the next slide, please. Now let's take a look at the staffing domain. Next slide. But before we talk about the changes in staffing and the staffing domain, let's take a quick look at how the staffing domain is calculated. There are actually two separate case mix adjusted nurse staffing measures. There's the RN staffing hours per resident day, and then total nurse staffing hours per resident day. And this includes LPNs and certified nurse aide hours and the RN hours. RNs and LPNs with administrative duties are included here. So staffing hours are reported through the payroll-based journaling system, PBJ system. The census that is used to help calculate the staffing level is pulled from MDS information that is submitted through the Keys ASAP system. The accuracy of your specific population or your census depends on submission of discharge MDS assessments. The staffing hours reported include full-time, part-time, and contracted staff, but they only include those hours which are worked. So it doesn't include people who are on vacation. This does not include any paid time off, family-funded private duty staff, hospice staff, or seating assistants. Next slide, please. So CMS adjusted the thresholds for the staffing domain, and there is greater emphasis on RN staffing. A key point that I want to mention is that if your facility reports 4 or more days in a quarter with no RN staffing, you're going to receive a 1-star for RN and a 1-star for overall staffing. Previously, a facility had to have 7 or more days in a quarter with no RN to receive the same star rating. So this is a change, and I've had a lot of people ask me, what happened to my staffing star? And I tell them, go back, look, double check, make sure you know that you're not missing RNs for 4 or more days in the quarter. So this puts a lot greater emphasis on ensuring that your staffing that's submitted through the PBJ system is accurate and is submitted by the deadline. I've seen where a facility had only 1 RN in a 24-hour period. They had 1 RN scheduled. That's not uncommon. And then that RN calls in sick. and they were replaced with an LPN. Now, I've worked with facilities where this happens frequently on the weekend, and if this were to happen 4 or more times in a quarter, you're at risk for getting that 1 star for RN staffing and 1 star for overall staffing. You can see it is possible to drop to 1 star if you're not ensuring that RNs who call off are replaced with another RN if they're the only RN within that 24-hour period. And then lastly, staffing ratings are no longer being suppressed for facilities that report residents and no nurse staffing. Next slide. I want to point out another change that CMS has made, and this change is a change in wording from expected hours to case mix hours. CMS adjusted the reporting staffing ratios using RUG-4 using the case mix system. So reported hours are those that are reported by the facility through PBJ. National average hours for a given staff type represent the national mean of case mix hours across all facilities active on the last day of the quarter that have submitted valid nurse staffing data for the quarter. The national hours are updated every quarter. And this slide just illustrates how adjusted hours are calculated, which is the hours reported, again through PBJ, divided by the case mix hours, which are based on the acuity using the RUG-4 methodology that comes from your MDS. And then this is multiplied by that national average hour, and then this is the result. The result is your adjusted hours. Next slide, please. The overall staffing rating is based on a combination of RN and total nurse staffing rating. There is where the average is not a whole number, the overall staffing rating would actually round up towards the RN staffing rating. So for example, if you have a nursing home that earns 4 stars in total staffing, and they are a 5-star in RN staffing hours, their average would be 4.5. This would then be rounded up towards the RN rating value of 5, and the nursing home would receive an overall 5-star staffing rating. Next slide, please. There are some exceptions to the scoring rules for staffing. I mentioned the issue of 4 or more days, and not to be redundant, but that's a biggie. 4 or more days in the quarter with no RN, you go all the way to a 1-star. But there are other exceptions. So failure to submit any staffing data by the required deadline for any of the audits that CMS is sending out requesting staffing data would also result in a 1-star rating for overall staffing and RN staffing for the quarter. And also failure to submit staffing during the, failure to submit any staffing data by the required deadline, of course, gets you a 1-star rating. Then I mentioned the audits, and I just want to say too regarding those audits, I had a facility reach out to me and say, you know, we didn't know that CMS was requesting information regarding our staffing, and so they missed the deadline for the audit, and so they received a 1-star for overall staffing, RN staffing for 3 months from the time at which the deadline to respond passes. So you need to make sure that you're on the lookout for these audits and that everyone is aware. Next slide, please. So next up, we're going to talk about the quality measure domain. Next slide. This is one of the domains that has seen a lot of changes. So the QM domain uses both MDS and Medicare claims data, and that part isn't new. But the number of claims-based QMs has increased, and I'm going to discuss that in just a moment. There are now 17 quality measures whose performance impacts the 5-star rating. There are 10 long-stay and 7 short-stay measures. Most nursing homes, and this is new, will have 3 QM ratings, You have an overall rating, a long stay quality measure rating, and a short stay quality measure rating. For nursing homes that only have a long stay or only have a short stay, the overall QM rating then is equal to their long stay or their short stay QM rating. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates the 8 MDS-based long stay and 4 MDS-based short stay measures. I want to specifically point out that the restraint use QM has been removed from the 5-star calculation. So one of the reasons we're seeing stars change under this domain is a lot of facilities were doing really well and getting all those points for the restraint QM, and now that's no longer being factored into the 5-star QM portion. Values, I also want to point out that values for 5 of these MDS-based QMs, mobility decline, catheter use, long stay pain, short stay functional improvement, and short stay pressure ulcers, are risk adjusted using resident level covariates that adjust for resident factors associated with differences in performance on the QM. Again, this is another reason why it's so important to make sure that our MDSs are accurate. I want to also point out, not all QMs that are reported on the Nursing Home Compare are used in the calculation of the 5-star rating, and that holds true for restraints. Restraints is still reported, but it's no longer used in the scoring. We'll discuss the scoring methodology for the QMs in just a moment. Next slide, please. So here we have the 5 claims-based QMs used in the 5-star calculation. There are 3 short stay, and in April, the successful discharge QM that you see here has moved to the SNF QRP technical specifications for that measure. In addition to those 3 short stay claim-based measures, CMS has added 2 long stay claims-based measures: number of hospitalizations per 1,000 long stay resident days, and then the number of outpatient emergency department visits per 1,000 long stay resident days. Because these measures use Medicare claims data, they can only be calculated for Medicare fee-for-service beneficiaries. Next slide, please. In addition to the new and changing QMs, if that wasn't enough for you, the scoring rules for the quality measures changed to give more weight to measures with greater opportunity for improvement. Given the changes in the measures and weights, there's also new point thresholds for the overall quality measure rating as well as the short stay and long stay ratings. So the QMs use 2 different sets of weights. Some measures are going to use deciles and have a maximum point value of 150 points, while others are going to use quintiles and have a max of 100 points. These weights were determined based on the opportunity for nursing homes to improve on the measure and clinical significance based on feedback from experts in the field. By the way, facilities want to earn more points under the QM domain because more points means more stars, unlike the health inspection where more points means less. Next slide, please. So the QMs listed here, you're seeing, are the ones that facilities with the highest performing scores are going to receive 150 points. These points are calculated based on performance relative to the national distribution of the measure. So if you are struggling right now with long stay antipsychotic use, you can see here, improving it is going to definitely improve your points that you get under this new methodology. So these all have the ability to earn 150 points. So the highest performing decile receives 150 points. The lowest performing decile receives 15 points, and then points are increased in 15-point intervals for each decile. Next slide, please. take a look here. Here you have the QMs that use 100 points for the highest performing quintiles. So if you are in the highest performing quintile, you're getting 100 points. The lowest receives 20. And look at these quality measures. Many of us are already doing really good at short stay pressure ulcer and short stay antipsychotic medication use. So next slide, please. So guess what? Additionally, the short stay pressure ulcer and short stay antipsychotic QMs, which are QMs that occur less frequently, are scored just a little bit differently because more than 20% of nursing homes have 0% rates on these. So for those two QMs, nursing homes with a QM value of 0 are awarded 100 points, and then the remaining nursing homes are divided into groups, maintaining as close to even quintiles as possible. Next slide, please. So here are the cut points for the quality measure ratings. And I just want to point out just a few things because I'm sure there's a few of you on the call today that are really into calculating your points for QMs. And the points here are summed across all long stay QMs, all short stay QMs, as well as across all QMs based on the scoring rules. So it creates a long stay QM score, a short stay QM score, and a total QM score for each nursing home, and that's new. The long stay QM, you can see the score ranges between 175 and 1250. Now, due to the differences in the number of measures and weights, the unadjusted short stay score has a maximum of 900 points. So, in order for the long and the short stay measures to count equally in the calculation of the total QM score, an adjustment factor seen here at the bottom of the slide is applied to the unadjusted total short stay score. So after applying this adjustment, the adjusted short stay score then ranges from 167 to 1250. Meaning the total overall QM score, which is the sum of the long stay, and again, the sum of the adjusted short stay, ranges from 342 to 2,500. Just want to point out, just so everybody's clear, facilities can receive an overall QM rating if they have one of the following categories. If they meet one of the following categories, they have to have points for all of the QMs. They have points for only 10 long stay QMs. They have points for only the 7 short stay QMs. And then if they do not have sufficient data for either long stay or short stay QMs, then they would have no QM ratings for that facility. Next slide, please. So now let's take a look at how the overall star rating is calculated. Next slide. So first, we start with that health inspection star. Remember I said that is the foundation. And next, we go to the staffing star. Now we add 1 staffing star if the staffing star is 4 or 5 and is greater than the survey or the health inspection star. Or we may have to subtract a star if our staffing was a 1 star. So you can see the impact of the staffing only impacts your overall score if your staffing star is a 4, 5, or 1. Then next, we would add 1 star to the overall star to your star rating if the quality measure is equal to 5 stars, or if the quality measure is 1 star, you're going to subtract a star. So in the end, this 5-step process gives you your overall star rating. Next slide, please. Of course, there's some exceptions to the scoring I just mentioned. If the health inspection rating is a 1 star, then the overall quality rating cannot be upgraded by more than 1 star based on the results of staffing in QM. So you can only go to a 2 star if you're a 1 star in your health inspection. If a nursing home is currently a special focus facility, then they will not get an assigned overall rating. Instead, they're going to see a yellow warning sign that will be displayed on Nursing Home Compare with no available information is displayed for the domain rating. Next slide, please. So now we get to talk about some of the strategies to help you improve or maintain your current star rating. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about CASPER reports. There are a number of CASPER reports available to facility leaders, and these are going to provide you with a wealth of information. Now, I want you to think about when you take this information back and put it to use, think about what areas you're struggling with the most under the 5-star. Is it health inspections? Is it staffing? Is it quality measures? And if you say it's only one or it's all three, start making a list of those areas under each of these domains to where you need the most improvement. Then you can use the CASPER reports to help you really pinpoint your specific facility concerns. So for example, the CASPER reports have information on survey history that you can pull. They have quality measure reports that you can pull, including the resident level QM reports. They also have staffing and census reports from PBJ that I'm going to talk about, as well as MDS reports that can show things like missing assessments or what your MDS assessment or census shows. So it's really important for you to use and access these reports to help you pinpoint, really do that deep dive into what it is specifically that you need to work on in your facility. Next slide, please. And although I didn't include the survey history, I just want you to know that those reports are out there for you to access and use, because it's going to give you 3 years of your survey history. Another piece, and the QM piece, is where most providers lost the most stars, and that's why I'm spending a little bit more time here on this area. Accessing these MDS 3.0 QM reports is vital. These reports provide you with insight into what areas the facility is doing well in and what areas you need to improve upon. I would compare this to the list, starting with what areas that were on that 150-point list could we make improvements on, and then go to the ones with the, that give you 100 points. So start with the most bang and work on those, first, of course. So you're going to be able to use the QM reports to see how well you're doing. Now, to see what areas you need to improve upon. You're going to be able to see how you're doing against other facilities for a given QM, and you're able to drill down to see what residents have triggered for a specific QM. You can use this to ensure that your MDS was coded accurately, and you can use it to also see if any of your systems or processes kind of stand out. So, for example, if you see a specific area that stands out, like pressure ulcers or UTIs, you're going to be able to center all of your efforts around these two areas that to get the most for your, the most improvement. Next slide, please. The other thing I want to point out is your payroll-based journal reports. Many facility leaders aren't even aware that there are such reports, so I want to make sure you're aware that these reports are available for you. And at a minimum, I'm going to talk about 2 reports that you're going to want to look at. Next slide, please. The first report is the 1702D Individual Daily Staffing Report, and this is important because this shows the staffing hours reported for a day. Remember earlier I mentioned that 4 or more days. I keep reiterating that, but that's 4 or more days in a quarter with no RN gets you a 1 star, both in RN and overall staffing. So you want to look at this before the end of your reporting quarter to make sure that all of your staffing data has been not only submitted, but it's accepted and it's accurate here. I've had facilities say, we checked it after the date of the submission date and it was wrong. So you really want to make sure that your information is accurate when you're uploading it. Next slide, please. So the next report is the 1704S, the MDS Daily Census. So if the census information isn't correct, why is this a big deal? Well, you could look like you have less staff than what your acuity calls for. So this report allows you to audit the accuracy of your daily census that is used for staffing calculations. I'm going to refer you to the CASPER reports, the guide for full details and a list of all of the PBJ reports available to you, because there's a number of reports that you can use to help you really hone in on areas under staffing. And maybe you need more RNs, or maybe it is that you had the 4 days in a quarter and now you've dropped down to a 1 star. Next slide, please. And additional strategies. So when working with 5-star improvement, I want you to consider having a simple strategy to help you identify your improvement opportunities. It's so easy to get caught in we need to make improvements in all areas. Find those areas using those CASPER reports, make a list and prioritize based off that list. And when I say simple strategies, I'm talking about having 2 areas. Let's say, for example, you've selected your areas, and then look at what do we need to do to look for staff competency education opportunities that are specific to our issues. So when people say, how do I find these opportunities? Well, you can find these opportunities by looking at your facility-wide assessment, your QAPI reports and minutes, incident reports, and if you use near misses, if you're reporting your near misses, use that for an educational opportunity as well. So once, using this 2-step strategy, I look at everything from a perspective of what education can we provide to improve a process, and then number 2, what within that process do we need to look at? So I do what I call a system evaluation. And system evaluation process involves looking at things like your, let's say, pressure ulcer prevention program, and looking at it from the standpoint of what does our policy say? Is our policy realistic? Involving staff in helping us to determine gaps in our system. So one of the examples I like to use is, let's say you are a facility that has a high number of readmissions to the hospital that results from UTIs. So what you're going to do is you're going to center your staff education around UTI prevention and early detection, and then look at your system. What systems do you have in place for infection control? Does it need to be revamped related to prevention of UTIs? And I hope that kind of helps you. Then another example would be if you have several residents, let's say, who have declined in ADL ability. So what's happening in this case, I would look at my restorative program as the system. So does the system or program need to be reevaluated and changes made? And what do I need to do to improve staff participation? So what education? So again, just a 2-step process, looking at everything from what do we need to educate staff on related to this issue, and what is our, does our system have gaps that we need improvement in? Again, I can't tell you enough to ask staff that are closest to the work for input. They often have the greatest ideas, and their input can be valuable because they can tell you things about why something doesn't work or why it does work or how it could work a little bit better. Next slide, please. So I want to end, before I open it up for questions, I just want to throw out there some food for thought. So with the 5-star changes, I mentioned earlier, we knew that the 5-star freeze for the health inspection was coming. But some of the other surprises that came along with it, like the change in the quality measure methodology, the changes to how staffing is calculated, those were kind of surprises. So I just want to leave you with some thoughts because PDPM is right around the corner. And hopefully everyone listening in today has a really solid plan for rolling out PDPM. But if you don't, I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts so that you can avoid surprises like we had with 5-star. First of all, I want to emphasize that PDPM is really heavily influenced by ICD-10 coding. And I know I hear many people say, well, you know what, we're really getting our staff up on these coding, on coding and to be really good ICD-10 coders. But remember, it's more than just your NAC getting ready for this. It's also meeting with your hospitals, your discharge providers to get the documentation needed to support the ICD-10 coding. It involves getting physicians on board and making sure they understand how important it is to have not only timely but accurate ICD-10 coding. Also, I just want to point out, I'm going to give you some examples. PDPM really relies on positive outcomes. PDPM is going to have a variable per diem rate. So the longer that someone stays, the lower your rate goes. So I just want to keep just put out there that having therapy involved is still really important for positive outcomes, as well as it's going to be important to help move them to the next level of care, whether that be home health or home with family. We need to keep in mind that therapy is very, very, very important to our under PDPM. And remember, to be skilled, you still need 5 days a week of therapy. So again, therapy is very important. I also want to throw out there, just put it out there for everyone, that SNF QRP is currently in the proposed rule. The SNF PPS proposed rule calls for it to expand to all payers. Now, granted, that's not right away, but what does that mean? That means more MDS items to code. And additionally, SNF quality measures under SNF QRP are growing. We have that transfer of health information that is also mentioned in the SNF QRP, in the SNF PPS proposed rule. So we are looking at more quality measures under the SNF QRP program. And also, just one last little tidbit, as our MDS schedule is shrinking under PDPM, so come October we may have fewer assessments, but boy, the accuracy of this is just so crucial, not only for your QRP measures, for your 5-star measures, for your nursing home compare, but also for your survey outcome. And so I really want you to know that the MDS is going to continue to expand as more items are added, both from SNF QRP and also potentially under PDPM as well. I hope that you have found today's information helpful. And with that, Alex, I will open it up for some questions, if we have some questions.
Yes, we do, and thanks for that great presentation. Feel free to submit any more questions you may have again through the interface. We probably will not get to all of them because there are tons of questions, and thank you so much for the interest in this topic, and feel free to reach out to us or some of the panelists today offline to get some of those questions answered if you need any additional information. But let's start with this question. Can corporate consultant hours be counted as staff hours for PBJ?
Oh, what a great question, Alex. This is great. So, according to the PBJ frequently asked question document, someone from the corporate office who is performing duties involving resident care, the hours that they spend doing that can be reported even if that person is paid through the corporate payroll system. So these hours need to be reported like contract hours under PBJ. So let's say you have a corporate nurse, for example, that is filling in for the director of nursing. You're definitely going to want to make sure that those hours are included in your PBJ hours. Otherwise, it's going to hurt you under both RN and overall staffing and your staffing domain. So what an excellent question.
Great. Moving along, we also have a question here. What survey will count in calculating our star rating if we didn't have any in the last 20 months? We are waiting for them for almost 2 years.
Wow, that's a long, long time. So the survey, the most recent survey, would still be counted as 1/2 of the weight for the health inspection so those last 3 surveys are going to count, okay, so when you get a new survey, it's going to count this one from 20 months, the recent one, and then the one from 20 months ago would be in what they call cycle 2, and then the one prior to that would be the cycle 3. So it still counts, yeah, but that's a long time.
Yeah, and we have a related question here, and this is actually a good one. This one is from one of our viewers here who asked about the sale of a SNF and the change of ownership. Does that affect the survey and the star rating? Like if there's a change of ownership, will it be like starting over with a new building in terms of calculating the star rating?
So that's a good question. I want to say that it depends on the type of ownership change that there is. So, and you know what, just like that, the name escapes me, but if you're assuming liabilities and so forth, and you're not starting your MDSs over, although, now that I think about this, you would have a new survey. You know what, I would actually have to double check on that, because if you undergo a new certification survey, you'd only have one survey under that, so it is possible, I'm going to say.
Got it. Shifting gears now back toward PBJ, what happens if there's an RN MDS coordinator who's also salaried and ends up working, 10 to 12 hours per day? This is probably a common thing, whether you work in this industry or many others. If you're salaried, you often work more than 8 hours in a day. What gets counted for PBJ in that case?
So if the RN, nurse assessment coordinator is actually working as the MDS coordinator the 12 hours a day, then PBJ hours would be whatever regularly salaried hours that person is working. So for example, if the person was working 40 hours in 5 days, and that was their typical schedule, if you will, then they would get 8 hours reported per day. But if for some reason they are called to work on the floor and do direct patient care and they are paid separately, and this unfortunately happens in many facilities, then those hours can be separately counted from the salaried position. And facilities want to make sure that those hours are paid and counted. Otherwise, what will happen is their staffing calculation is going to look like they had a lot fewer staff than they really did, because those salaried people can only count for what their regularly salaried hours are. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it definitely does make sense. We have a question here from someone who was watching who had a follow-up question about the CASPER report that you mentioned earlier. How do people find that CASPER report about to figure out if they have a missing MDS? Is there a specific number that they have to look up? Is there a specific place where they can look within CASPER for that?
So, excellent question, Alex. So I would tell them to go to the Keys ASAP system and pull down the user's manual, and there's a list of reports, CASPER reports, and so you can actually pull. There's a manual, if you will, where all of your reports will show that you have access to, and there is a lot of them. And right off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact name or which chapter that is, but there's you find it on the Keys ASAP system under their manuals, and you will see a section that's called CASPER reports. I can see the front page of it. I just can't remember what chapter it is. So it says CASPER reports, and it'll give them a list of all of the CASPER reports that are available. Don't be afraid to use your NACs too. They oftentimes know exactly what is listed under CASPER, and you can poke around. You go on the CMS web, or on the where you upload your MDSs, and you can actually click on CASPER and go in the CASPER files and see what is available as well. But the reports is a great way to get a list to know what you're wanting to pull down.
Great. We have a question here about the impact of a discharge assessment on the staffing ratio. Can you go into that a little bit more?
I can, and I'm happy somebody asked about that, because they didn't really go into great detail, but the daily resident census is actually used as the denominator of the reported nurse staffing ratios, and that is actually derived from MDS resident assessments. So CMS identifies the quarter for which the census will be calculated, and then what they do is they extract MDS assessment data for all residents of a facility beginning 1 year prior to that reporting period to help identify. That's how they identify all residents that may reside in the facility. Then what they do is they identify discharged or deceased residents using the MDS to determine the date of discharge. There's another piece to this. They also, for residents who haven't had an assessment for 150 days or more, those residents are actually assumed to not reside in the facility as of that 150th day. But I'll tell you, what happens is sometimes when our schedules get really, really super busy for the nurse assessment coordinator, those discharge assessments can sometimes be, put on a back burner, if you will. And if they get forgotten and they fall in that, that gap where you forget them, then your census, it could look like you have more residents in your building, and those residents require higher acuity than what your staffing that you reported shows. So it makes it look like you're understaffed, essentially.
Great. Moving along, we're getting a lot of great questions here, and really appreciate you taking the time at the end of the presentation to answer these. We have a question here from a viewer about hospice. Are residents on hospice always counted in the quality measures? This person expresses some concern because they're at high risk for certain things like weight loss and pressure ulcers, and obviously hospice residents are there's a different patient quality and different goals there. So are they always included in the quality measures?
Well, it depends on the quality measure. I'm going to start with that. Each of the quality measures, so each of the quality measures has its own exclusions and covariates and various things like that. So it's going to depend. It's an excellent question, and it's going to depend on the quality measure. Now, I'm thinking, like, my head is, I'm glad you can't see because my wheels are spinning, because there was something, I think there's something in the proposed rules about some changes to, I can't remember if it's a quality measure, so I better not say on that until my wheels stop spinning. I apologize, Alex. But each quality measure has its own set of criteria. And what's difficult, I think, for providers today is that depending upon the quality measure, it can be difficult to find the specifications. For example, the quality measure, many of the quality measures that are used in 5-star, you can locate via the quality measure manual. However, there's one quality measure, the short stay pressure ulcer quality measure, that actually takes you to a retired SNF QRP quality measure. So there's that, and then on top of that, the quality measures that are claim-based have a different location for their technical specifications. So I know it's not a great answer, but sometimes hospice does impact our quality measures, but more often than not, it doesn't.
Got it. And then we have another question here about another change to the five-star calculation. Now that restraints are no longer part of the five-star calculation, is it okay to use them?
You know, I had this question before as well. You know, I think there's some confusion. Please don't misunderstand. Just because restraints are no longer used in the five-star calculation, I just want to remind our listeners that they are still, you know, impact someone's functional ability. They still require a medical symptom. They are still reported on Nursing Home Compare, and they are still under immense scrutiny, of course, during the survey process because they are associated with negative outcomes, if you will, like increase in pressure ulcers, decreased mobility, increase in incontinence. So I would say that it is, you know, the rules have not changed regarding restraint use.
Got it. And it looks like that is all the time we have for questions. Amy and Susan, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to present this great information today.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you so much.
Before we wrap up, just a quick reminder that you will be getting an email directly from the team at Quality Rehab Management, QRM, with the recording of today's presentation, as well as all of the slides, just in case you want to go back or share them with some of your coworkers who are not able to make today's presentation. Thanks so much again for your participation. Have a great rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Skilled Nursing News webinar.